Head of Research, Change Initiative. Thank you.
Good morning, and is it working?
Yes, sir. It's working.
Welcome to this session, 16th session. And of course, you know, the title Impacts of Climate Change. There was another session previously, I guess. I'm sure you looked at the program. There are 4 papers, 2 on Bangladesh and 1 from Nepal and 1 from India. So it's very well represented, this part of the world. And of course, the topics of research and presentations are quite varied too. So you cover quite a bit of ground. But all the let's say climate impact. So in terms of the rules, I have to read out from the instructions. I got 5 minutes for opening remarks, which includes this, what I'm saying. Each of the presenters will have 10 minutes and you'll be warned a couple of times halfway through, and then 1 minute to your 10 minutes allocation. So timekeepers must be very alert, so you should listen to it. And I don't think there will be all presenters are here, 4 of us, and also the discussion. There could be online participants, so somebody will keep a tab on whether there is any queries from there.
There is the timekeepers.
So, sorry.
I'm going to keep the time.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay. And so on the Zoom, right, they will take part. Discussions, of course, the most important participants in this session who will guide us through each of the presenters' presentation and shed lights for further development. So he has got 15 minutes to discuss, and again, the timekeeper will look after this sequence of events. And I'm sure throughout the presentation, you will come across a lot of issues and would like to raise questions, but could you please hold your tongue until the discussant done his task? And I'm looking forward to a very vibrant, engaging discussion. Once the questions are raised, I think the presenters will have opportunity to debate, answer questions and queries, but not enough time. But this is just the beginning of the conversation. If you are interested in any of the areas of research, feel free to get in touch with the presenters here or later on. That's the whole purpose of having it, just develop some networks. So that's pretty much it. Should I go into presentation, or I have a few minutes left? Or should I have some opportunity? Is the timekeeper, right? 5 minutes gone past, right? Okay. So let me, with your consent, let me welcome the first presenter, Nabila Hassan. Her topic is child marriage, natural disaster, and climate change nexus in rural Bangladesh. So those who are interested in this will be very elated. She has almost finalized at the final stage of her PhD research. So quite thorough and robust discussion. We're looking forward to. Over to you.
I'm just এখানে slide সামনে যাবে একটা পিছিয়ে।
Thank you. Hello everyone. Assalamu alaikum. So my name is Nabila Hassan. I'm currently doing my PhD in University of Manchester, and I'm in the final year of my studies. So today I'm presenting my first empirical chapter, which is about child marriage, natural disaster, and climate change nexus for Bangladesh. And both my supervisors are co-author in this paper. So let me start. When we think about child marriage, it's a staggering fact that almost kind of 51% of females who are aged between 20 and 24 are married before they reach even the age of 18. And it's like Bangladesh has the highest prevalence of child marriage in South Asia. So it's lagging far behind than its peers in kind of mitigating. So historically it was much higher, but it has been reduced, but not kind of that much, because you can see if it's more than 50% still. So definitely there are kind of mechanisms and kind of reasons why this is still high, and especially for the rural part of our country. So I think before going to the, like defining the research gap, I'd say like child marriage actually have huge impact, not in the short run, but also in the long run, because it's impact the education, even like education of the child or female, mental health and well-being, even their economic kind of empowerment later in life. So, and it has kind of, it creates such kind of obstacles around child's health and well-being and kind of like mental health. That's like in terms of SDGs around female health or child health, it is a big obstacle. And the key drivers are mostly finding like the socioeconomic drivers are education, like parental education, income, occupation, kind of region of residence, and sometimes it's like depending on the regions as well. In the maybe coastal regions where you have significant natural disasters frequently, like cyclones or floods and those things, it's higher there, and kind of also related to economically poor regions as well. So although there has been a lot of studies around kind of the socioeconomic drivers of child marriage, and some studies on kind of impact of climate and natural disasters on child marriage, there remains a significant research gap between like how you can infer about the causal relationship between these three, like child marriage, natural disaster, and climate change at a country level, with kind of regional dynamics, and that also taking in account the climatic exposure and vulnerabilities. So the objective of my study is to find that link, like the causal link, infer about whether climate stress or natural disasters increases the incidence of child marriage, and what is the mechanism behind that. And I'm trying to do that using a unique panel data for Bangladesh, the Bangladesh Integrated Household Survey data by IFPRI. And I'm merging the historical climate data such as temperature, precipitation. So for initially, I have done that using the temperature, and I will extend it to precipitation and salinity and other climatic shocks. And also I'm using the conceptualization of given like it's very popular in climate change dynamics, the climate change response model, where you can explicitly see the vulnerabilities of the households and kind of the response shocks they give after a climate change impact or natural disaster, and also about the adaptation or kind of preferences, preferable strategies they take. And I will further discuss it in the mechanisms as well. So I have just talked about this, like the socioeconomic factors, about like education level of females and their partners, occupation of parents and husbands, family size, and community level factors are the socioeconomic status, rural residence or ethnicity, and religion as well. And also the poverty and rural residence. So girls from poor households with less education and in rural locations are more higher risk due to climate change shocks or natural disasters, and so forth, the low income status or limited exposure to mass media. So these are the kind of few key kind of research around this topic so far. So one of the papers by Khanna and Kocher, it's a very recent paper from 2023. So they took a specific event like the Koshi River floods in Bihar and tried to find the impact on the marriage market. So they did it for both men and kind of show that these floods actually kind of reduced marital age for both men, male and females, and that kind of accelerated the gender inequalities. Another paper by Kariko et al., they kind of explored the nexus between like climate induce extreme weather events such as heat waves or dry spells that led to early marriages and less advantageous matches in southern part of Bangladesh, like a specific kind of district for Khulna. And Asadullah et al., they did a climate vulnerability kind of study for coastal Bangladesh that increased child marriage due to disaster-induced economic and social stressors. And for my methodology part, I am using the Bangladesh Integrated Housing Survey data, which is a nationally representative panel data for rural Bangladesh. And it has 3 rounds of data on from like 2011-12, the first round, the midwave was 15-16, and the last one 18-19. And it covers around 5,604 households across 325 primary sampling units and all the 8 administrative divisions of Bangladesh. And it's a rich data set. It has modules about the natural disaster, those shocks, early marriage. In particular, the last wave, they asked the household kind of females, head of the households or the household females, elderly females, that whether any girl was married off between 2011 to 2018, that timeline. And that's how we kind of constructed our child marriage dummy. And also about socio-demographic profiles, livelihood strategies, and also about health, education, those kind of access, incomes, and their kind of financial debt or loans in the households. And also in the community service, you have information about the infrastructure, market accessibility, environmental conditions, even the longitude, latitudes, those informations in the community level data. And I am merging the historic climate data, which is from Climate Research Unit, CRU, version 4. And I'm using monthly and annual temperatures data in degrees Celsius. And I'm also extending this analysis because this is a work in progress for precipitation, salinity, and other climate variables. And I kind of merged them with the BIHS data at union level to analyze the climate change impacts on child marriage. So this is my model specification. I'm using the high dimensional fixed effect model. So here my dependent variable is the child marriage dummy. So as I have talked, like we use that information particularly about the age of the children. And then I constructed it whether the child's age was between like less than 18. So then the child marriage dummy is 1, otherwise 0. And CR is the climate stress variable. So particularly for this case now, like the temperature deviations in survey rounds from the long-term average, let's say the 30-year average. And XI is a vector of individual characteristics. So there's a typo here, sorry. It's just the individual characteristics. And fixed effects are household fixed effect, district fixed effect, and time fixed effect with the error term. So this is kind of the initial result that I run from the high dimensional fixed effect. So in there, in both the individual and household level regression, so I have done in 2 separate cases, I have done both for individual data and the household level data because the survey has both informations. Both of them, you can see the climate stress or you say the climate variability. It definitely has a positive association of increasing the child marriage for the household and also at individual level. And both came as like marginally significant at 10% level. And all the controls I mentioned in the regression, like the identification strategy were here. And we use the district fixed effect. And the reason for using the district fixed effect was as we kind of culturally kind of representative at district level, when we think about marriage, we kind of normally define our identities at the district levels. And also because I took the climate variables at the union level, so that would make the union level fixed effects kind of more, I would say, like inappropriate. But I think
Time is over.
Time is over. Okay, I'm just going to sum up. So I did the robustness checks with the natural self-reported natural disaster data, and it also came as significant, which like induces that climate change increases child marriage. These are some margin plots. I would just quickly skim through them to kind of see the results, how significant they come with the natural disaster incidents. I wouldn't say too much about the mechanism. I just shortly say that in the response of natural disaster or climatic stress, if the households do not get to exercise other kind of coping mechanisms such as consumption smoothing of food items or kind of diversifying farming methods or diversifying their livelihoods, those strategies, then they kind of go towards more of climate like child marriage, because the dowry will increase if they do not marry off the daughter soon. The household size could be reduced if they marry off their daughter soon, and kind of it then becomes a coping mechanism for households for this shocks, economic shocks. So just quickly for like the key findings, as I said, that climate stress and natural disasters significantly increase the incidence of child marriage, and other control factors significantly which came in the study are female-headed households, higher parental education level, and fewer dependents, reduced child marriage rates. And some policy recommendations are maybe if the continuous, like the current climate adaptation programs could identify properly the vulnerable communities more accurately, or not just the quantity of education, but also increase the quality of education, and also implement some targeted social safety net programs to further decrease the child marriage rates. And thank you. Thank you for listening. Yeah, I can sum up now. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Nabila Hassan, for your succinct presentation. A lot more can be said, but given the time limitations and the very strict instructions from the timekeeper, we have to cut it short. But there will be opportunity for discussion. Now, let me invite Mr. Amit Mittal to make his presentation. This is the second paper. Climate change impact on Indian crop yields, retrospective analysis, and future projections. Over to you, Mr. Mittal.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just have to go to this and back. Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Myself, Amit Mittal, and the topic of my presentation is climate change impact on Indian crop yields, a retrospective analysis, and the future projections. This paper is co-authored with Dr. Shauryabrata Mohapatra, Dr. Sanjeev Pohit, Shobhini Mondal, and Srija Basu Chaudhary, and all of us work at NCER, New Delhi. So, why we choose this topic? In the current scenario, one of the most concerned topic around the world is climate change, and that is directly related with food security and energy security. And climate is a direct input of agricultural production. So, if we look at the recent trend on Indian climate scenario, you can see the temperature is rising. There is a upward trending line we can see here, but for the precipitation, there is no clear-cut declining or uprising trend, but you can see the variability, the fluctuations that matters for the precipitation, not very much matter for the temperature scenario, but for the precipitation, variation or fluctuations matters. So, in the IPCC projections that global GDP could decline by, global agricultural production could be declined by around 16% by the end of 2080s. And if we look at the Indian scenario in 2018-19, the crop yield or crop loss is equivalent to almost 0.25%, which is huge. And India is an agricultural country. India's GDP currently depends mostly on agriculture. So it is a matter of concern, like the climate change and the agricultural production. Despite the fact that India achieved the Green Revolution in 70s or 90s, but if you look at the scenario, like impact or the advantage was not very equivalent or equal throughout the states. You can see the disparities between the states. Like most of the advantage is the states like Haryana, Punjab, mostly the northern states got the advantages, but not the southern or the eastern states like that. So our research question in this context is how the climate change affects agricultural productivity in India over the past 5 decades, and what are the non-linear and crop-specific impact of climate change. if we look at the existing literature, when you consider the climate change, you have to take at least 4 or 5 decades of data to actually capture the climate. When you are capturing 2 or 3 decades data, that's not the climate change. That's actually the weather change. If we look at the climate change, you have to capture around 5, 6 decades of data. So most of the literature that lacked this kind of concern or this kind of things, and the literature exists, that the existing literature that doesn't capture the various range of crops. Like mostly they captured the staple crops or the food crops, the food grains, but they didn't consider the cash crops or the oil seeds. That is also important. And no, there is no all India level study on that kind of issues. So the novelty of our study that we have captured the 50 years data, a diverse range of crops, at least 20 to 25 number of crops we have included and categorized into cereal, pulses, oil seeds, and cash crops. We have also incorporated the IPCC SSP scenario to for the future projections, like what will happen at the end of the 21st century and the policy analysis. We have collected the data from CMIE and India Stat for like climatic and non-climatic data. If we look at the non-linear trend between the crop yields and the climate variables, we haven't found anything serious or anything important like for precipitation and the crop yield, but for the temperature it matters. We have found some non-linearity here for cash crops or like the pulses. We'll discuss that later. What is the implication of that? For empirical methodology, this is our, we have used a semi-log model and some pre-estimation test we have captured, like the Fisher unit root test, VIF test, so make our model more robust. And we have used the panel corrected standard errors PCSA method to capture the cross-sectional dependence and the serial autocorrelation. And this is the marginal effects and the elasticity. This is the formula to capture the future the impacts of climate change and the future scenario. So if we look at the result for the cereal crop, if we see the average temperature for most of the crops, like for finger millet and rice and wheat, the average temperature is the effect is positive. Why it is positive? So we need some level of temperature to for the rice production. But if we look at the temperature square for the nonlinear effect, that reveals that after a certain period of time, temperature is not very useful, or high temperature is not very useful for rice production or the food crops production. So that is square terms capture the nonlinear effect, like for after a certain point of time, the production declines. If you can see the similar trend for wind speed also, and the evapotranspiration and the precipitation pattern. For most of the precipitation, if we see for most of the crops, the trend are negative here, square terms. So initially it is useful, initially it is beneficial for the crops, the precipitation, but over precipitation is not very useful. So if we look at the pulses, we can see the similar kind of trend that initially it is very useful, but after a certain point of time, it is not very useful. So that is one of the significant result we have got from this study. For oil seeds also, you can see the similar kinds of trend. And for oil seeds, the precipitation, the sensitivity is most compared to the temperature or wind speed or evapotranspiration. For wind speed, you can see the negative trend. Of course, for pollination, wind speed is necessary, but over wind speed or high wind speed is not very beneficial for the crops. We may have some crop losses in higher wind speed. And for cash crops, you can see the similar kind of trend. Then we have incorporated the future projections based on the SSP, so shared socioeconomic pathways, and we have predicted the results for 2040, 2060, and the end of 21st century. So if we look at the trend, some crops have the positive impact like groundnut, cotton, barley, millet. But if we look at the projections in the next year, that there is positivity, but the values are shifted towards the negative trend. Here it is positive. Here it is also positive, but magnitude is very small. And most of the staple crops like wheat, maize, and chickpea, rice, the effects are negative. So what is the solution here? We have captured the crops with highest tolerance. We have calculated that part. So in the cereal category, sorghum has the highest tolerance against the temperature and wind speed. And for precipitation, palm millet shows the highest resilience. And for pulses, only chickpea shows the highest resilience against the temperature and wind speed, and so on. For cash crops, it's cotton. So, what is the policy recommendation? Like, we have categorized the crops based on their characteristics, and there are 4 categories cereal. So, you can say we can diversify or replace the crop production, but you cannot replace the rice with wheat or sorghum because India is a diverse country with different food preferences. Some parts they consume more rice, and some parts they consume more roti and wheat. So you cannot replace rice with wheat. So what is the actual solution for that? So we have proposed that for climate smart agriculture, incorporate AI or highest climate resilient variety, and diversify the production or water management. Like for India, if we see the past trend, the groundwater level is declining over the years. So if we incorporate high yielding variety seeds and some that could mitigate the climate problem. So that could be one of the recommended policy. And what is the future direction? Like, what will happen by the end of 21st century? Because it is a matter of food security, and we cannot survive without food. So we have to think about it, and some other climate variables we can prevent that. Like for precipitation, we can mitigate that with some better water management or some kinds of other things. So we have to think about it. We have faced some kinds of limitation while studying. Like we haven't got any crop specific data for labor or some kinds of other non-climatic variable, like how many tractor is used for rice production or how many electric pump set is used for the rice production or wheat production. So that is one of the limitations of our study because we didn't get any kinds of data. We got the data, but it was for around 10 years or 15 years, but we have tried to capture the 50 years effect. So that is one of the limitations of our study, but I think that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mittal. Within time, right? Congratulations.
Thank you.
Right. So many of you are from economic discipline, right? Economics. It's a dismal science. It's scary. And what do you think about climate change? Is it scarier? Yes. Yeah? Hold on, you haven't heard it all. There are 2 more papers, right? Let me invite the third presenter. It's Sarmin. This is your home turf, right? You're from Sanem. She's going to make a presentation on climate-induced migration, identification of alternative cities to Dhaka, and their economic opportunities. Over to you, Shraddha. So while they're setting up without mic, you traveled this morning from home to this place. So what do you think about Dhaka traffic? Yeah, enjoyable? Oh, come on. You see a lot of things on the way, right? You've got a lot of time to spend on traffic. Okay, so you do need an alternative cities for future migration, right? Internal migration. And those foreign visitors, friends, I don't know the situation back home, but we are struggling with our transport system networks. Yeah. I'm just filling in time if you're ready.
Sorry, yeah. Thank you so much for giving me the floor. So the presentation that I'm going to make on the topic is climate-induced migration, identification of alternative cities to Dhaka and their economic opportunities. I have 2 co-authors with me, Dr. Selim Raihan and Mr. Tuhin Ahmed. So the background of this study is very obvious. Like we all know that climate change is going to create a lot of migrants, and there have been various literatures about it. So in Bangladesh, what we have seen is that at least 700,000 Bangladeshis were displaced every year by natural disaster over the last decade. And in 2020, the number was 4,27,000. So basically, what we have also seen is that the internal migration that has the destination of mainly Dhaka. Everyone is going for the capital city, the urban city, for all the amenities and all the opportunities. So we actually thought that this city actually eventually we need to look for the alternative, and for sustainable urbanization we need to look at the alternative, and that's what we tried to do. So the objective was to look for secondary cities and map them and look for and justify the secondary cities that we are proposing, and at the same time analyze the potential of their growth and goods and services, and identification of the financing modalities of making them the future hubs. So this was a mixed method study where we have had primary data collection of both qualitative and quantitative. So we have had KIs, FGDs, and at the same time we have had surveys, 2 surveys, farm level survey, and at the same time stakeholder perception survey. So due to time constraint, I'm not going to go into the details of this. There was a desk research, and after that, when we started looking at the city mapping, how we looked at it is that to ensure that the regional economic hubs, the 3 primary indicators that we looked at: growth potential, diversification potential, and government buy-in. So for the primary mapping, there is a specific definition of city, and based on that, we first mapped 485 upajelas, and from them 8 key indicators were identified under 3 broad categories, and that data set had these indicators: extreme poverty rate, average household expenditure, number of non-agricultural establishment per square kilometer, number of non-agricultural establishment per 1,000 population, number of EPZ, SEZ, etc., and mega projects. So ultimately, what happened is that after selection of these 485 upajelas, we actually made 2 separate lists, with one with Sadar upajela and another without that. And after that, the final list included 64 Sadar upajelas and 110 upajelas. So for the final mapping, what we did is we primarily selected 174 upajelas, and after that there were 54 indicators in total, based on which we again mapped the upajelas. So these are the 58 indicators that were taken under the broad indicators. Broad indicators, we see that for diversification potential, we have taken quite a lot of indicators, and we have actually collected data for them from secondary data. So initially we used a simple average method to calculate, and after that we used principal component analysis, or PCA method, for this. Then what we did is the average weighted score of these 3 broad categories. We calculated that, and that was all. Okay, so I'm not going to go to the mathematical steps of PCA and other methodologies. So the final 3 cities that we propose are Sylhet city, Rajshahi city, and Mirsharai. So basically, Sylhet city and Rajshahi city came as one of the top 10, the two Shodor cities from the top 10 cities, and Mirshorai was the one which was 48th, however, 45th, sorry. So Mirshorai was taken based on a number of government buy-ins, the number of projects and future plans around Mirshorai, which actually provoked us to do this. So identification of cities, okay, done. So farm level survey, what we did is we did a survey of some farm level surveys. So the basic features, I don't think I have much time to discuss all of this. I'm going to go into the findings of it. So the employment, we have seen that these cities have demand for semi-skilled workers, farms that are providing skill training to their workers, and the members of the farms, they think that CIM or climate-induced migrants will be important resources for their farm in the future. So based on the data collected, we also created a BCI index, Business Confidence Index. So the elements of BCI was profitability, investment, employment, wage, business cost, and sales or export. So based on the BCI findings, the city has shown quite remarkable result in terms of sales, in terms of employment and investment and profitability as well, or wages as well. Business cost shows a little bit of less scenario, less promising scenario. However, that was kind of same for across all the cities. By sector, what we have seen is that we have seen that all the sectors kind of shows us the similar type of result. After that, we created another index to understand their business environment. There were 12 major components to this index, enabling business environment index: electricity, telecommunication, internet facility, utility services, overall tax system, business on property registration, etc. So based on that index, what we've seen is that government support was very high, transportation system was very high, and we've seen that utility services were also very high. The sectors also show us a promising result. So the final objective was the study was to look into the financing modality, and we saw that the financing modality is mostly private bank based. The survey response showed us that still it is difficult to get loans from bank, and they showed us that lengthy procedure was the main reason for that. The firms were maintaining CSR activities. So after the stakeholder survey, we also did a stakeholder survey that I was talking about, which consisted of academicians, civil service members, and government officials and politicians. So we've seen that based on the stakeholder survey, that housing facilities were great in these areas. We have also seen that the cities were safe and secure in terms of their stakeholders. The education facilities were great. The health facilities were somewhat okay. They were not very good, but at the same time, it was similar or less for other cities. We have looked into infrastructure and institution, and we have got mostly positive views. Female employment opportunity also showed us positive view. And most importantly, mass people's attitude towards migrants were very positive. So overall, this is actually the findings mostly from Mishorai. The findings are similar for Sylhet and Rajshahi as well. So the policy recommendation for all these cities would be that creating a well-planned urbanization and taken the access to finance issue into consideration, and at the same time the utility services into consideration. And we need to actually prioritize cities, or we need to actually decide where we will place our climate induced migrants, and this is high time we actually plan towards this. So this was a starting point from us to do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Charmaine. So you're proposing to create 3 more Dhaka cities. Sorry, it's cynical agreed. Don't take my word on. Thank you. Very interesting presentation. And so far, you see, we face problems and we come up proposal for solutions. That's what we do, right? It's part of adaptation. We have saved the best for last, right? Our guest from Nepal, Sanjeev, I have difficulty pronouncing Nemafuki. He's a graduate student from the top university, the biggest university in Nepal. He's making presentation on environmental dependence and economic vulnerability in Nepal's rural communities.
Yeah, it's connected. This is what's right. You can check it out.
Quiz for you. What do you understand by climate change? Oh, quiz for them. The participants.
Take 1 minute with them, just come back.
Sure. No, he's not going to make presentation, so I'm doing it.
Right.
Any idea what climate change means?
Can do everything. Okay.
Yeah. We'll come back to that. Over to you, Sanjeev.
Namaste and good morning. I think it's still good morning, I guess. So
We passed
yeah.
pineapple
Sorry.
standard.
Okay. I'm Sanjeev Nemafuki, a graduate student from Central Department of Economics, Tribhuvan University, Kirtipur, Kathmandu, Nepal. So first of all, I would like to thank you all for your kind presence in the presentation as well as in the conference. So now I would like to formally begin my presentation. So the paper I'm presenting is titled Environmental Dependence and Economic Vulnerability in Nepal's Rural Communities. Here's a brief outline of the contents. On the background, according to the World Bank, the global rural population is on the declining trend. However, it still remains significant, with 43.5% of global population residing in the rural areas, and 80% of the poor, 80% of the poor by income standard or other living standard measures, they reside in the rural areas. And climate change and other factors make them more vulnerable, as well as susceptible to the migration. So, with that, it has been creating uneven distribution of the resources. That is, it creates competition for the resources in the urban areas, whereas the rural resources are often squandered. So, on this understanding, it is essential to study rural populations and their livelihood strategies, and particularly because the rural livelihoods are closely linked to the natural resources and natural environment. So, based on this, in this picture, this is the images from the study sites. So from this, we can infer that the rural livelihoods in Nepal are heavily linked to the natural resources and natural environment. So this study aims to understand the differences in the household vulnerability across regions in rural Nepal, which is key for the policy development. And it also aims to identify the factors that are associated with the vulnerability of the vulnerable households, which also play a critical role in planning of the interventions to address those vulnerabilities. So there has been some studies related to the analysis of rural livelihood strategies as well as some vulnerabilities, but there remains the gap in the literature studying the link between the environmental dependence and its influence on the household vulnerability. So to fill those gaps, we do some theoretical review. Robert Chambers and Gordon Conway, they developed the sustainable livelihood approach and to assess the vulnerability and also help in the also contribute in the development cooperation. And building on this, DFID, Ellis and Schoons further enhance the sustainable livelihood approach. And on household vulnerability, a study in China finds that all forms of capital, that is financial, human, natural, physical, and social capital, they were all important determinants of household vulnerability. A study in Ghana finds that higher economic status was linked to the worst impact from flooding, but they were essential for household recovery over time. And in a study in Bangladesh, they quantify the cyclone vulnerability, which also finds that the nature of the multidimensional nature of the vulnerability, and these the capitals were essential. And in Nepal, in the context of Nepal, Oxy ETL developed a social vulnerability index, while Sahi and Srizal computed vulnerability scores using Nepal Living Standard Survey third round dataset. And Vista assessed relationship between the climate change and household vulnerability. And Gerald's ETL computes a multidimensional livelihood index based on Kosi subbasin in Nepal. So after a brief review of literature, the brief review of the in-depth review of the literature revealed there is scant literature on the association of environmental dependency and household vulnerability, and which most of the studies relying on the cross-sectional data. So to fill those gaps, we utilized the longitudinal data to capture the intertemporal dynamics of the household vulnerability in the diverse physiographic regions in Nepal. So for that, we construct a household vulnerability index using these capitals, namely human, physical, social, and livelihood, and financial, using minimax maximin method. And after that, we assess this association between the household vulnerability and with the primary independent variable being environmental dependence, using the panel data regression techniques, OLS, random effect, and fixed effects. So we have employed the Poverty and Environment Network, also called PAIN dataset, which was jointly produced by the Institute of Forestry, Tribhuvan University, with collaboration from University of Copenhagen's Department of Food and Resources Economics. And it was collected from three Mustang mountainous, Kaski, a mid-hill, and Chitwan, a lowland district, in the year 2006, 2009, and 2012. So we construct the household vulnerability index using minimax maximin method, where equation 1 applies for the variables which has upward functional relationship, where equation 2 is for those with downward functional relationship. And in equation 3, we get one of the 5 capitals, which we sum them in equation 4 to get the composite household vulnerability index. And afterwards, we apply the panel data regression techniques, namely pooled OLS, fixed effect, and random effect. where our dependent variable is household vulnerability index, and our primary independent variable is environmental dependence. And we also control for dependency ratio and depth and shocks. And we also include time invariant fixed effects, that is district and VDC, and year fixed effects. And afterwards, we also conduct some diagnostic tests. And we also plot the district level household vulnerability index radar chart. So from this, we can see that the Mustan, a mountainous district, which is shown to have the highest level of vulnerability in 2006, 2009, and 2012. So from this, we can infer that the mountainous district in Nepal has the highest vulnerability. And we also plot the village level radar chart. So here also the Kunjo VDC has the highest vulnerability, and Leyte following it. So both of these VDC come from the mountainous district. And these are some of the metrics showing the different vulnerability level, and high, moderate, and low, as well as their persistence and transitions. So we plot these transition and persistence and transients in this alluvial diagram. So we said this, we plot that the matrices of the different household vulnerability and their persistence and transients. So we go from 2006 to 2009, and we can see how many have persisted and transited. So now coming to the panel data regression. So in this, we see that the bivariate relationship between the environmental dependence and household vulnerability is positive and significant. And it is the case, its result is same for the multivariate, that is including the all the controls and the fixed effects. And this is the pooled OLS regression results, where we start with a parsimonious model and gradually considering the controls as well as the fixed effects. That is the case with the same is the case with the random effects and fixed effects. And we also conduct the diagnostic test to consider whether or not to consider individual and time effects. And we also conduct BPLN, Bruce-Pagan Lagrangian multiplier test, and Hausman specific test to choose between the models. And here are the diagnostic test results. Now coming to the conclusions and recommendations. Concluding higher environmental dependence results in high level of vulnerability. That is also the more dependent family members, and number of shocks experienced by the household increases the vulnerability level, while access to debt or having more debt reduces the vulnerability. And on policy recommendations, when considering or when drafting the anti-vulnerability policies, the diversity of the reasons needs to be considered. And policies that help lower environmental dependency could be key. So some of the recommendations would be to diversify the livelihood strategies, maybe through educational initiatives and other cross-sectoral collaborations. So these are some of the references I've used in the slides. So with that, I would like to end my presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you, Nemafuki, Mr. Nemafuki, for a very timely presentation and proposing some solutions to mitigate economic vulnerability of rural communities. So that formally concludes the formal presentation. And of course, you've been waiting for quite some time, about 40 minutes or so, to hear from our designated discussion, Mr. Ishtiaq Bari, Head of Research, Climate Initiative. Further ado, over to you.
Change initiative. Thank you.
Climate Change Initiative.
It's just change initiative.
Oh, change. I'm sorry. Climate is in my head.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Ishtiaq Bari. I'm the head of research for Tiny Initiative, which has become the World Bank observer for the CII fund for next 3 years, 2025 to 27. So it has been a great achievement for us. Coming back to this particular presentation, yeah, there are 4 presentations, so overwhelming for me even to comment on that. 15 minutes, right? 15 minutes, right? Okay, great. To start with, obviously, Nabila, she has done really good in her presentation. I congratulate her for presenting this particular paper. The objective has it has been our PhD thesis. Obviously, it has gone through a lot of scrutiny already. So I'm not getting into the nitty-gritty of the methodology, refinement, and all that stuff because she has her stipulated advisors to do that. For me, one thing that I would request her to exercise probably is to utilize the method of inverse probability weighted regression adjustment. Inverse probability weighted regression adjustment that will probably gonna help you to differentiate your results somewhat and whether it has any robustness in refinement in it from your current results. Also, I would request you to think about running probit and logit regressions too, so that you can show the differences in between the models. Obviously, it's a PhD research work, and you are doing it from a top school that we're going to require it, and even in your paper submission during after this particular conceptualization. One thing that I would really love to see probably, I understood the way you have tried to find out the linkage between climate change and the child marriage. But to me, at individual level, if I really want to see that, probably that is going to be more or less, we know by default it will want to be something, right? That will, for me, the more interesting topic in this particular ground is probably if we look at the vulnerable districts, or we have like districts. Difference in climate-induced upojelas versus non-induced upojelas, and see at the even upojela level whether that actually translates true that climate change actually impacts child marriage. That we're gonna give something like is to get into the right. Obviously, what she has mentioned, all these things are intergenerational impacts on health, education. These are all true, and we are all knowing about it. So for Nabila, I would rather suggest that you can address more methodologies and see whether there is a difference in the literature. Sorry, in your results. For the second paper, Amit Mitra, yeah, it was an excellent presentation. Obviously, climate change impact on Indian crop yield. So it's roughly about, it has shown roughly about 20-25 crops. To me, that is a problem for sure, because India is a diverse landscape, and the Haryana agriculture is not same as Punjab agriculture, then the Kerala agriculture, right? So making it aggregate together do not give us a very clear picture what you are telling right now, because to me is kind of summing up. Obviously, some crops will gonna grow well with high temperature, some will gonna go well in low temperature. If you look at the floriculture, a subsector of, let's say, agriculture, so that requires lower temperature. But if lower temperature comes, that may help, but probably wind is an important issue that also can nullify the positive effect that has been created by the climate change, right? So there might be climatic parameter issues as well. So in this particular case, I would rather go with probably one state or probably a few specific crops to better understand the substitutability ability, right? See, if he has done actually a good thing that he has tried to find out the maximization point, right? After what amount of temperature your productivity goes down. It means now the story is if the productivity goes down for crop A, whether there is another crop B that actually been take up as a substitute. That would have been an interesting story to understand. If the temperature reaches that, then you actually move from A crop to B crop. And if B crop has lower productivity or lower yield, that actually reduces your real income, right or wrong, right? So the story, I would rather suggest Amit to find a story out of it that will gonna make a better understanding of your hard work that you have done. And obviously, the last recommendation that we often put up, right? At your age, even in my age, or even my seniors always put up many things like, after doing a research, we always write, AI can solve that, right? Water management can solve that, drought tolerant rice, that can solve, right? But in your particular research, right, you haven't checked all these things. So basically, what we are basically saying in our policy relevance is just a sweeping comment. So in this particular round, I can see a lot of you are probably students or probably just graduated from the economics or other branches of studies. So the first thing is we cannot like answer 5, 6, 7 policy questions from one particular research. So stick with your research and whatever outcome you have received. See, from his paper, sorry, from Nabila's paper, it is probably one is the added knowledge to the literature, right? Another is another story that we're going to redefine the next generation research, right? So you really need to understand, probably Nabila has created one thing that is added knowledge that she has created in this particular literature. And probably that is important for other research to carry on, right? So this is what it is very important that we just cannot give sweeping comments like that, AI will going to solve these problems and all that. So we need to refine this particular thing in our research further. Yeah, coming back to Strat, she was my colleague too at CPD. So basically, it was climate-induced migration. See, her paper and other two papers are quite a bit different, right? She talked about climate-induced migration and can we create alternative to Dhaka city so that they actually move towards those cities rather than coming to Dhaka. There are fundamental issues. These are two academic papers. Her one is more of a project report that she tried to find out a piece of academic literature, right? So her job is a bit difficult because she worked with an project objective and all that, and then trying to find a gray area in the literature, right? So looking at keeping that in mind, even that I would rather start with in her particular thing, what we have actually gone for the structural changes that required in Sylhet, right, Rajshahi and Mishorite, what she identified to welcome people or discourage people to move to Dhaka and welcome them to divert them towards them, right or wrong, right? The important thing that I would rather start with those who are currently migrating, right, from Khulna, Joshua, whatever it is, where they are absorbing in their in terms of the sector, where they are basically absorbing right now. If they are absorbing in construction sector, right, you just cannot create construction sector in Sylhet and ask them to go there, right? If they are basically absorbing in garment sector, you cannot create a garment sector there because there is not enough availability of water, right? You can actually provide gas, you can provide electricity, but water is a major scarcity. So you realize that when we were talking about 100 EPZs earlier and special economic zones, one of the major ingredient that is the problem with particular glorification of this kind of industries is water. So without water, industries cannot go, right? So this is one thing that you have to remember. And those, there are two kinds of people who are migrating. One is with family and without family. Probably from those who are coming with a back of river erosion problem, they have lost everything. Their migration story, and probably someone who has lost something but somewhere resettled in that particular area, but they have lost their job or livelihood options. They came back, so they actually came back to Dhaka. So basically, their problem is completely different, right? So isolating those two are very important, and how big the problem is individually and in families. We really need to get into the slums, and probably, if not getting into the slums, we really need to consult the slum surveys that we are having. Like we have 3 series of slum surveys that would have informed you better where they are basically been occupied after migration. That will help to identify these are the things that they are looking for in other cities. And shifting someone from Khulna to Rajshahi is very difficult, right? Shifting someone from Chittagong to Sylhet is difficult because there are cultural barriers too. So if you are assuming absolute migration of their family when you are telling this particular story, right? There's a big assumption in this particular thing. Third, but yes, I like the idea that people are thinking about whether can be an alternative to Dhaka city. But for this particular thing, I have a perspective, right? You can plan for Dhaka. You can actually build hundreds of metro rails and everything, right? You are planning for 4 crores. If you build another infrastructure, 6 crore people are going to come in, right? So the important thing, if you really wanted to diversify, your growth rate in other cities must be higher in proportion than Dhaka. Otherwise, you cannot accommodate those concerns because these are structural changes that you're looking for. The opportunities must be otherwise different, otherwise more to deviate or discourage people to go to Dhaka rather than that will be their choice. Think very carefully. In Brahmanbari I belong to, I have a 5-room house and I probably make 8,000 taka to 10,000 taka rent out of that particular apartment. That particular apartment in Dhaka is probably costing 40,000 to 50,000. Still people are looking for it. Still I'm here, right? Why I'm here? This is very important to answer. Otherwise, we cannot actually combat on this particular structural change problem, right? The third thing, the fourth paper is all about Sanjeev. Okay, it's a good paper. Environmental dependency and vulnerability. So in this particular case, the challenge for this particular researcher was he has to define both the variables, X variable and the Y variable, because it has not been something already done, right? The data he got from different variables, he has actually made an index in X, index in Y, and then run a regression. In this particular case, I will probably ask you to look into the multicollinearity issue because you have taken debt as well, the dependency ratio, all in X variables. That is going to create a big problem. You should check, obviously. I believe you have checked as well. If you are a graduate student, whatever you have done, I'm going to give a much appreciation. But if you really wanted to push yourself further, then I'm going to ask you to look for the indigeneity problem. That is the relationship between X and other hero terms, because in your variable, there are like Mustan, and I can see Mustang and Chitwan. So basically, I went to Chitwan last December. So it's a very lowland, more like Bangladesh, Bihar, like agricultural area. And Mustang is like a very fascinating, like adventurous place where you're gonna get there. It's a very adventurous place, and it is completely dependent on tourism and other, right? So my understanding is, if my hunch of this particular story is that probably tourism benefit is offsetting less of the vulnerability than the traditional economic benefits that are translating from agriculture or manufacturing hubs that Chitwan is receiving, then probably Mustang, even tourism industry or adventure industry is not creating enough benefits to offset that vulnerability. Otherwise, this regional variability probably would not there. Again, the problem is it could be bidirectional as well, right? So all this you can think through and improve. But if you are a graduate student up to what you have done, like panel, RE, FE, and postman. Obviously, these are the basic things that we do. And I also appreciate all of you have done and attended. Okay. So I think I have made my points clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bari. I know covering 4 papers as varied as they are is not a mean, is not a very trivial task, right? And Mr. Bari has done an excellent job covering all those papers and pointing out options for improvement, options for actions. But, now, the most exciting phase of this session, and you know what, right? The floor is open to you. You can ask, you can open your mind, ask any questions. I can see hands up there at the back. So I'm sure somebody is gonna run.
Go back and then come. Eliminate one by one.
Can I just give a few advice? Introduce yourself, and then if your question is directed to any of the presenters, mention that. If it is general, just say general. Anybody can pick up. Thank you.
Thank you. So, hello, I'm Paramita. I'm currently a student in University of Dhaka Department of Economics. I'm in my third year. So, my first question is to the first paper. You said that the effect of climate on the early marriage. So, does it take into account the issue of economic vulnerability, like being vulnerable to climate change, depending on the household income and wealth distribution, how it affects the whole distribution? Like, are the poorer households more vulnerable to this change? And there's also a question like, there are some areas that are that have more frequent calamities, like floods every year, versus there are some places that don't have as frequent calamities. Like last year, we saw flood in places that weren't previously affected by floods. So what's the difference between those effects? So that's my question. And to the third paper on climate migration. So I wanted to ask, why are we replacing Dhaka, like alternative to Dhaka is other city centers? Like, why can't we focus more on the other rural areas, like one rural area to another? Maybe because there is more economic opportunities in city centers, including Dhaka. But it also comes with this counterintuitive thought of mine that Dhaka or other cities will have a higher living expense compared to other rural areas, which would actually make them more vulnerable because they have lost a lot of their belongings due to the climate change. Thank you.
Hi, I'm K.M. Arshad, fourth semester student of the Department of Economics, University of Dhaka. My question would be to Mr. Amit Mitra. How do you estimate non-linear effects compare with findings from the global studies on climate change and agriculture? Thank you.
There are a couple.
Hello, I'm Afrika, and I have 2 questions for Sanjeev Nimafuki. The first question is, what specific interventions should be prioritized for highly vulnerable households beyond general diversification strategies? And the second question is, could ecotourism or agroforestry serve as sustainable livelihood alternatives for resource-dependent communities? Thank you.
Hello, this is Najmul Arno. I work at SANEN, and I'm also a student of Department of Economics, University of Dhaka. I have 2 questions. Actually, one question for Nabila ma'am and one question for Mr. ma'am. Ma'am, we have few child marriage act in Bangladesh. In 2017, there is an act called Bangladesh Child Marriage Restraint Act. And how do the findings align with or contradict past policy interventions from the studies? And also a following question, does the study consider alternative measures of child marriage instead of binary variable?
My next question is to Ishat ma'am. What specific policies and investments are needed to accelerate economic and especially sectoral growth in the identified cities, and are you guys are confident about it? Thank you.
She raised her hand. We'll take, given the time limitations, right? We have to give them opportunities to respond, and also I can sacrifice about 5 minutes, but make it brief and pointy.
Hello, I'm Ruhani Rahman, third-year student of Department of Economics, University of Dhaka. I have a question for Ishat Sharmin. Are the selected cities at risk of future climate impacts like flooding, water shortage, and if so, how should adaptation policies be incorporated? That was the question.
Any more takers? One over there.
Okay, sir.
You're reluctant.
Okay, as I'm organizing.
Sure, that's okay.
So actually it's not a question, it's kind of like an observation to Ms. Isha Sharmin. So in development economics, we studied about the per city bias. So for due to colonization or Dhaka has where people it's structurally designed that people has to come here. So unless and until you answer those biases, you cannot like decentralize. So in the past, we have seen like a government that has been here for 16 years, they centralized everything in Dhaka. So you have to answer those issues, I think. Access to these services, so that could help. Another observation to Mr. Sanjeev, I think the fixed effect model you used, you could use some instrumental variable. Use a lot of rainfall data over the years, so you can use that. You can see the results for that. Yeah.
Thank you. Can we make it the last question, kindly?
Hello, sir. I'm a PhD scholar at Indian Institute of Technology. My question is to ma'am, like he has tried to find the climate possible, but I could not find the link within the paper. So what could be the channel through which a child climate or a climate variable can affect to the child marriage? Because if you see the child marriage, that is motivated basically from the financial perspective. If you are poor, you will go for the child marriage to your children earlier. So I think how climate factor could be related with the child marriage. So one is the real factor, second is the social factor. So I think that find a mix. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, time to respond. So start with Nabila.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. A great set of questions. I think I will start from the beginning. I think the first question was regarding the economic vulnerabilities or income levels of households. As I can incorporate, actually, I am planning to incorporate a kind of mapping, let's say like the poverty mapping, and incorporate the child marriage rates there as well. So that could kind of show us some kind of linkages of how the households that are poor, like in those regions, is child marriage is also like vibrant there as well. But I think in the literature, it is kind of well established that the poor households are kind of mostly they kind of exercise the practice of child marriage. And that's the first one. And the second one, I would say like the frequency of specific like disasters in specific areas. Like we did the robustness checks with the self-reported natural disaster data. So they were specifically asked about those disasters like the floods, cyclones, or river erosion and those things. So it comes as a robustness check to our analysis. But I think in the mapping, that will also kind of help if we kind of have a vulnerability kind of mapping of the climate more climate vulnerable communities or areas of Bangladesh. And the third question was about, maybe I put it like a past initiatives, interventions, and policies. So that's also a tricky question, because I forgot to mention, because I put it in my paper, that child marriage is also linked with social norms and kind of the patriarchal norms that we see, those social stigmas. So although you have a kind of child marriage prevention act, it's not effective in reality, right? So most of the cases, people, when like the groom's family asks the dowry, and they cannot ask for that. And even about the, like, a lot of campaign has been going about the age of at marriage as well. But in reality, it's too difficult to implement. So they sometimes don't report it, or kind of there is a lack of, I'd say, awareness about that as well. Although you see a lot of initiatives going on, but I think we can strengthen these initiatives and kind of the policies to address those things. And I inferred in the policy prescriptions that improving the quality of education, it's not just educating your girls or their families with just, let's say, for primary or secondary education is not enough. Your like education would have to be of better quality, so that the awareness can kind of grow up, I'd say. And I think for about the alternative mechanisms, I also have the age at marriage variable, so I can include that as well as an kind of alternative specification with the child marriage dummy. And the last one about the mechanisms, like the linkage, that did not came here, because I tried to say it in the mechanisms that it's not that climate stress or natural disasters is directly imposing child marriage. It's like if the affected households, they don't have, like, they fail to achieve any specific sustainable coping mechanism. Let's say they fail to have, like, diversify their livelihoods, or they try the consumption smoothing of their food, like food consumption, or fail at that as well. And if they have a large household size, so it's like sensible for them to marry off the young child, so that the household size mitigates, the economic pressure mitigates, because most of the cases, these shocks are economic in sense to the households, but the kind of direction is not just shock to marriage directly. You have those kind of alternative strategies, and if they fail, then you go to, like, exercise that kind of policy, like that strategy of child marriage. Thank you.
Right, I'm going the seating in order of seating arrangement. So what to you, Sanjeev?
Thank you. Thank you, discussant, sir, and thank you for your suggestions. And coming to the question on interventions, yes, livelihood diversification is the foremost, but also investing in education or having more qualified member in the family gives you an opportunity to go out away from from where you live, and then that is also one of the diversification strategy. And on top of that, I think now the cross-sector collaboration and the building of social capital, as well as the role of the local governments. So not sure how Bangladesh structure is, but Nepal is now a federal local. We have 3 layers of government, and we have local government. So the point I'm making here is whenever those households or those regions which are vulnerable will face shocks, the local government has to ensure that the most vulnerable are the first one to get rescued and get the relief. So expanding on the social capital as well as the role of local government would be another strategy. And on ecotourism, yes, the ecotourism and agrotourism for resource dependent. That is also one of the strategy. But when we are saying that those dependent on resources are
are also linked to the ecotourism and agrotourism are also somehow related to the natural environment and natural resources. So we have to build, or we have to settle those kind of livelihood strategy, such that whenever the climate-induced disasters or shocks come, that they will be rescued as soon as possible, and it would not incur huge loss on them. So yeah, on a household level, diversifying the livelihood strategy, and on part of the local government, rescue and relief, and yeah, identifying those most vulnerable. So I hope I addressed. Yeah, thank you.
What do you mean?
I got only one question from Harsha, and the question is how we have calculated the nonlinear effects. So we have the production function where the dependent variable is the crop yield, and the independent variable is the climate variable and some other non-climatic variables. We have taken the semi-log model, and for the climate variables, we have taken the normal climate terms and the square terms of the climate. And then we have got the partial derivative of the equation, and just we put the values of the mean value of that variable and the coefficient. That's all. So, thank you.
Thank you for giving the floor again. So first of all, I would really like to thank our discussant for the comments. And since the objective was primarily to look into the alternate cities, we didn't primarily look into where the CIM are going now, but that is an interesting dimension that we should look at, definitely. So the first question was alternate to Dhaka city, why? So alternate to Dhaka city is cannot be a rural place. That's because we have to look at the government buying, we have to look at the economic opportunities, the investment potential, and those things are naturally less in the rural areas and more in the urban cities. So if we look for an alternate for Dhaka city where people would be encouraged to migrate to migration, so that could only be another city. So we are actually that was our thinking process, right? So second question was about policies and investments. Definitely the SEZs, making them more functional, good health, education, and social protection, stuff like that. So everything that we are thinking about the whole country right now, we have to do it on priority basis. So that's where we were thinking that these cities, they need to be prioritized right now. The third question was about alternate cities whether they are about climate change, right? So they would not be actually future. They would not be more prone to climate change, because that's what we first saw in the first indexing. We actually saw that the less vulnerable cities, that's what we took in the first listing, right? So that actually eliminates the possibility. So thank you for the question.
Right. I got to make a big call. How many of you are hungry? Because I'm between you and your lunch. You want to hear a few words from me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah? You sure?
Yes.
Thank you. Let me thank all the presenters and the discussant. I couldn't hope for a better session. I've been a climate change economist, always mostly on the mitigation side. So take my words seriously. Climate change is basically science-based, right? So we need to understand science first and foremost. Otherwise, we'll come up with a lot of economic analysis which may not survive love test. So we cannot change some of the science. We cannot challenge that. So take that first. So yourself, as well as all the presenters, you should consider going through the basics of climate science. So I ask you a question. what is climate change, right? I don't know whether some of the speakers might have explained the difference between climate change and weather events. They're not unrelated. Climate change can affect the intensity and the frequency of events. So they're related, but climate change is not an independent weather event. So when you talk about all these things, clarify those and keep you in your brain this very clear. One of the speakers suggested that we need to consider 50 years. So when we talk about climate change, the time scale is huge. It's not just 1 year or 2 years, decadal. Scientists have developed models, climate models, that runs for hundreds and 200 and 300 years. They're crazy, right? But that's how the time scale for climate science is about. We cannot even see what is going to happen as economists tomorrow in the share market, right? So it's a huge challenge for us, but the time scale we have to consider. Weather event, it has happened, right? River erosion, there's a reason, they're linked to climate change. So keep that in your mind, very clear about that. In this session, we talked about climate change impacts. Now, in the most authoritative document on climate change, there is a framework that tells you about the impact, and that runs like this. Physical changes due to climate change, right? So climate change, that's it. And that climate change, people or society or a country are exposed to the risk of climate change, exposure. So climate change, exposure, and then we are not sitting on our hands, we are trying to adjust. We think about changes and we change. People do change, so that's adaptation, right? So exposure and then adaptation. Adaptation cannot mitigate climate change entirely, otherwise we wouldn't have this discussion here, right? So there is a residual risk remains, and that is vulnerability, right? And so autonomous adaptation is one. So we are just doing it, but there is, for this size and global problem, we need to have planned adaptation, which means community should get involved, individuals get involved, scientists go, and the government and global community, supranational institutions should be involved, like UN and World Bank and all others. So at different level of adaptation, planned adaptation, that's important too. So climate change, exposure to climate risk, adaptation, autonomous, and then vulnerability. And how can we mitigate vulnerability through planned adaptation? That is the name of the game, right? Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to lecture. I used to. Right, okay. The other thing about climate change is they're not, this is difficult beast. It doesn't matter whether we emit greenhouse gas here or in the US or in China, it all goes up in the atmosphere mix. So it doesn't matter who does what in terms of emitting greenhouse gases. But when it comes to climate change impacts, it discriminates. That's why we're having this discussion. The most vulnerable are the least able to cope. The poor countries, crowded countries, countries close to coastal areas, and all sorts of things. The climate change affects people differently, community differently. So one solution to one place may not be applicable to another. So it has to be very case-specific, community-specific, region-specific, and all that. And then we need to think about the future potential climate change. And one of the speakers suggested about social, economic pathways. So these are scenarios. And we don't know what scenario will pan out in the future, right? It could be, very scientifically oriented. Some could be very fragmented world. Trump is there, right? He's going to cut the globe into pieces. So a future with Trump forever, you can imagine. So those scenarios are important, and they're not, they're equally likely, but they're not. So forgive me, one of the very high-profile economists, he used to be the member of Planning Commission, sorted out Bangladesh for 100 years. climate change impacts and what we have to do. We got Delta plan. It's a crap plan ever. Not that he is not here. I raised that issue before. I raised that. You cannot think about 100 years from today, and you can prepare yourself, but you cannot develop some projects and things like that. But anyway, he's God forbid. He's good, but he's not good enough. Right. And now for all of you and also for presenters, and I'm a researcher as well. I used to do quite a bit of research for my living. Oftentimes we use models and we cannot think outside the model much. We just model-centric analysis and all that. And if we free ourselves a little bit, go beyond the model, set out the mechanism, the pathways through which one thing is affecting another, and then use model to explain some of the potential causality or effects and things like that. That's how you get good value for your time on research and all that. So think outside the model first, right? And then use the model to validate some of the assertions or some of the presumptions, all sorts of things. Don't your hypothesis dictate what you have to do. Right? So the model is one tool, but go beyond it. I'm repeating myself because this is a very common mistake as a researcher we make. Finally, so about the climate science, one thing came out from your presentation, shoot me if I'm wrong, that early on, with temperature rise, you got positive effect on crop yield. And there is a term called carbon fertilization, meaning carbon, if there is enough carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it helps the growth of plants and you get better yields. That's science. So we can look into that thing and try to explain the finding that we have. And climate is not always bad. If temperature increases, a lot of Russia and a lot of Canada will be cultivable. And they will be laughing, they will lose polar bear, but they will get other things going, right? A lot of fish, not hilsha, but salmon. Polar bear eats salmon, right? You can have a lot more salmon. No, not that, but research shows some of the countries, some of the areas will be benefiting, even from high temperature.
In Shakira, rice gone, but chingri.
Right. So there's a substitution effect. In terms of presentation, sorry, I wouldn't spoil your appetite. This is my last point. When we're making presentations, we have a title. There are concepts, important concepts, key concepts in there, right? Terms, concepts. I think if I am the presenter, I would focus on individual concepts, explain them first, so that I can hook the audience who actually dedicated the time, energy, and space, right? So that they get a clear idea of what it is all about. Rather than, I know we have a tendency to demonstrate how sophisticated the model is and all that, but if you cannot set the scene first, then all those modeling and things like that wouldn't be as, some of the mathematically tuned, economically tuned, they will find good value of the session, but as a general person, I would probably get lost, right, in those sophistications. So that's pretty much from me. Again, could you please join me thanking all the brilliant presenters and the discussants, and thank you yourself. Thank you.
We have some certificate for the
Right. You want